Hey there. Tonight, we're leaving behind the comforts of the present and stepping into the cold, creaking corridors of the past. You've seen castles in movies. Grand, majestic, bathed in candlelight. But real medieval castles? They were darker, harsher, colder. And honestly, you probably wouldn't last until sunrise. So, before you cozy up under that warm blanket, if stories like this fascinate you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. But only if you really feel at home here. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. All right, light a scented candle if you've got one. Pull that blanket up, and maybe let the soft hum of a fan play in the background. Let your imagination stretch back nearly 700 years. Because tonight, you've just woken up inside the damp, drafty heart of a medieval fortress. The year is 1328. You're cold and confused. The sky is leaking rain. The air smells like wet stone and livestock panic. And your shoes, wait, you don't have shoes, are soaked through with a fragrant blend of mud, animal droppings, and medieval despair. And there it is, looming before you like a stone monster in the gloom. The castle. But don't get too excited. This isn't the Disney version. There are no golden spires, no glittering chandeliers, and definitely no smiling butlers offering you warm towels and complimentary cheese platters. No, this place was built for one thing: defense, not decor. The outer walls rise high, thick gray stone, bristling with arrow slits, not windows. Why? Because glass is expensive, and feelings don't matter when you're trying not to get murdered by your neighbor's army. You squint up at the battlements, where some bored guard in a helmet is glaring at you like you might be a disguised Viking. Welcome to medieval hospitality. Suspicion first. Eye contact? Never. A wooden drawbridge creaks underfoot as you cross the moat, which smells like a compost pile's evil cousin. That's because it basically is. A castle moat isn't a romantic water feature. It's a bacteria-rich slurry of sewage, rainwater, and unlucky livestock that fell in and never climbed out. You pray the boards hold. Then you're inside the gatehouse, a narrow stone tunnel, dark, cold, and about as welcoming as a root canal. It's designed to be a murder funnel, literally. If someone attacked, this is where they'd get boiled oil dumped on their heads or skewered by crossbow bolts from above. But you're just trying to not slip on the damp flagstones as your medieval escort grunts and shoves you deeper into the heart of the castle. Through the courtyard now. It's not a place of peace. It's mud. Mud with chickens. Mud with carts. Mud with peasants hauling barrels of salted fish. You dodge a goat. Barely. Someone's yelling. Someone else is spitting. It's chaos, and you haven't even had dinner yet. Or breakfast. Or, let's be honest, a bath since 2025. Your teeth chatter as the wind cuts through your thin tunic. Castles are cold. Built of thick limestone blocks, they hold warmth the same way a vampire holds a tan. These walls weren't designed for comfort. They were designed to withstand siege, to trap heat from fireplaces like a sieve holds water. Which is to say, not at all. You're led into the Great Hall. Sounds impressive, right? Except, it's basically a barn with a throne at the end. The stone walls are damp, decorated with grimy tapestries that are more mildew than art. A massive wooden table runs the length of the room. If you were hoping for a warm welcome, tough luck. You're not nobility. You're not even a recognized guest. You're just that person who mysteriously appeared at the gate, which in castle speak means possible spy or witch. No one bows. A few sneer. A child points at your clothes and laughs. And oh yes, let's talk about your clothes. You look weird. Your outfit screams alien to the locals. Your boots don't match anything they've seen. Your jacket has buttons that confuse them. And if you're wearing anything remotely synthetic, congratulations. You might as well be wearing wizard robes. And that look you just got from the steward? That's not friendly curiosity. That's we may burn you later. You're shown to a corner to warm up, which just means you can huddle near the fire, but not too close. The fire is mostly smoke because chimney technology is still finding itself, and you're starting to realize that the warm welcome of a medieval castle is just slightly warmer than hypothermia. Oh, and don't lean against the walls. They're damp. The condensation makes the place feel more like a haunted cave than a noble residence. Mold crawls in the corners, and spiders, big ones, rule the beams above. Torches sputter on the walls, giving off more soot than light. The smell of smoke, wet dog, and something vaguely fecal clings to the air like a curse. The lord of the manor finally appears. You expect robes, a crown, maybe some regal presence. What you get is a grim-faced man in a tunic that hasn't seen soap since the Crusades. He stares at you like he's trying to decide whether you're worth feeding or flogging. You try to explain who you are, but your modern English sounds like nonsense to him. His eyes narrow. The room goes quiet. The steward whispers something. You're taken to the back of the hall. No one smiles. The door closes behind you. And just like that, you've arrived. If you thought that the smell of wood burning in the fireplace would be your first sign of morning, think again. The first thing that truly hits you? The stench. A blend of rot, dampness, and human waste, intermingled with something foul that's not quite identifiable, but somehow all too familiar. No, it's not the fireplace. It's the castle itself. Step out of bed, if you can even call it that, and immediately your senses are assaulted by an all-encompassing smell, like the castle's walls themselves are soaking in filth. The stone walls are cold, damp, and unforgiving, but they're more than just a barrier to the wind. They've absorbed the accumulated odors of years. And it's not just the walls, it's everything. The floors are covered in straw and dirt, which by now have transformed into a sludge of filth, animal excrement, and discarded food scraps. These are the remnants of last night's meal, which, judging by the smell, hasn't been cleaned up yet. No one in this castle thinks much of sanitation. You can hardly be surprised, given the lack of plumbing, waste disposal systems, or even a hint of modern cleanliness. The only thing being washed in here is the air, as it desperately tries to circulate through a few tiny, high windows, pushing out some of the pungent air, but never enough. The smoke from the hearth, which has been burning for hours, clings to your clothes, your skin, and the very air you breathe. But that's nothing compared to the reality of a castle's total lack of hygiene. breathe in. There's a good chance the air will feel thicker than you expect, a combination of stale human sweat and animal musk mixed with the stench of decaying food and mold. Yes, that's mold you smell too. Mold from the damp stone walls that are perpetually soaked in the moisture seeping from the roof and the thick mist that rolls in with the early morning air. In fact, you can probably even feel the moisture on your skin, creeping into your bones. In this world, there's no such thing as a bathroom in the way we understand it. Toilets, much less clean ones, are a far-off dream. Instead, every corridor, every hallway in the castle seems to have its own designated privy, a chamber pot tossed into dark corners or hidden behind curtains. But even if someone does have the luxury of a chamber pot, it's often emptied only once the smell becomes unbearable. And of course, there's no plumbing to carry it away. So where does it go? Into the courtyard, of course. Or more likely, directly into the street. Yes, you heard that right. It's tossed out of windows, into the same alleyways where people walk, where food markets happen, and where your children will play. The smell you're waking up to is not just an inconvenience. It's part of a daily reality. But let's talk about the hygiene, or lack of it, of the people you share this castle with. Those same stone walls that have soaked up the stench of the air are likewise absorbing the smell of unwashed bodies. You see, bathing wasn't a regular practice in medieval times, especially not for peasants. But even the higher echelons of society didn't often enjoy the luxury of a good scrub down. A bath was typically a large communal tub filled with water that would be used by everyone, with the eldest of the household getting to bathe first. This water, already tainted by the dirt of the first person, would get progressively worse with every dip. If you were unlucky enough to be near the end of the line, your bath was more of a soaking in dirty, stale water. Now let's circle back to that fireplace. You might think the hearth would be a comforting, familiar smell of burning wood. The fire, after all, is one of the few modern luxuries you might imagine living in a medieval castle. But instead of a cozy aroma, the fire adds to the oppressive odor that surrounds you. The flames lick at the soot, filling the air with a greasy smoke that coats your lungs. There's no chimney to vent the smoke outside, only open vents or flues that lead the smoke directly into the room. So, that smoky haze? It's inescapable. Of course, smoke wasn't just an inconvenience. It was part of the reason your eyes sting in the morning, part of why the air feels like it's pressing down on your chest. But the worst part? It's a constant presence. There's no fresh air in the castle, only the lingering scent of burning wood, the wet earth below, and the unrelenting smell of humanity and animals living in such close quarters. So, as you stand in your humble corner of the castle, your stomach begins to churn, not from hunger, but from the overwhelming odor that will stick to you throughout the day. You'll carry it with you, even after you step outside into the cold, fresh air of the courtyard. You'll smell it on your clothes, in your hair, and your skin will feel greasy from the unwashed grime that coats you like a second skin. That's the smell of life in a medieval castle, a stench of decay and discomfort that becomes as much a part of you as the stone beneath your feet. It's a smell you will learn to endure, because in this world, there's no escaping it. It's part of what you've woken up to, and it's part of what will stay with you as you navigate this grim, unsanitary world. You're not sure what hit you, but one thing's for sure. The last thing you want to do right now is reach for that mug of water. And yet, here you are. You're parched, and there's a bucket of water sitting near you. Seems innocent enough, right? Wrong. This is medieval Europe, and drinking water could very well be your last mistake. Let's break it down. Clean water was about as rare as a unicorn in the Middle Ages, and the concept of plumbing? Don't even think about it. What you get instead are streams, wells, and ponds, the very same bodies of water that serve as communal washing stations, animal drinking pools, and open toilets. That's right, folks. Medieval people had a somewhat flexible understanding of hygiene, and as a result, water sources were often contaminated with all sorts of unpleasantness. But here's the kicker. If you're lucky, the water might be contaminated with just dirt. If you're not so lucky, you're looking at a delightful blend of animal waste, human waste, dead fish, and various other unsavory items that end up in the water because, well, who's going to stop them? Let's talk contamination for a moment. In a medieval castle or village, the local well was often shared by everyone: peasants, livestock, and the occasional noble. Oh, and don't forget about the rats and insects that lived in close proximity to these water sources. You'd be hard-pressed to find a well that wasn't tainted by a little, sometimes a lot, of filth. You might even get a little bonus in the form of parasites, like hookworms or giardia. If you're lucky, the water was drawn fresh, but you could still be risking your life with every sip. So you think, I'll just go for the stream. That's still a terrible choice. Streams, though they may look pristine, were often the dumping grounds for everything from sewage to animal carcasses. The medieval idea of clean water was closer to water that didn't actively look gross, which, given the lack of understanding of bacteria and disease, was as good as it got. The reality was that nearly every source of drinking water was contaminated with something. This isn't even considering the terrible taste that often accompanied water sources that were stagnating or full of algae. Still, water might seem like your only option. But hold up. There's a better alternative: ale and wine. No, this isn't medieval Europe's version of, I'll just have a beer instead, though it might look like that to us. Ale, beer, and wine were often safer to drink than water because they were fermented. This process killed off harmful microorganisms that would otherwise make you violently ill. That's right. Alcohol wasn't just for socializing. It was a life-saving beverage in many ways. So you're thinking, okay, I'll go with wine. It's safer, right? Kind of. But this is 14th century wine we're talking about. It wasn't the smooth, aromatic beverage you might pour for yourself at dinner tonight. Medieval wine was a mix of strong, sometimes bitter liquid that could be diluted with water, and it had a much higher alcohol content than modern wine. They were essentially using it to mask the taste of bad water. But don't get too comfortable with this idea either, as the wine could be just as risky, depending on how it was stored. In fact, if it wasn't sealed properly, it could easily spoil, turning into something far worse than you ever bargained for. Then there's the matter of your health. The lack of clean drinking water led to countless illnesses: dysentery, cholera, typhoid fever, you name it. They were rampant in medieval Europe, and all of them came from the very water people thought was safe enough to drink. But without modern medicine, people had little recourse to fight off these diseases. Worse still, people didn't know that dirty water was the culprit. They thought bad air or witches were to blame. As a result, these illnesses spread rapidly, especially in crowded areas like towns and castles, where hygiene practices were a total afterthought. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. People did try their best to keep their drinking water clean. In the castles, they sometimes had cisterns, large containers that collected rainwater, but even that came with its risks. After all, if your roof was thatched and the gutters were full of dirt, animal droppings, and whatever else found its way up there, the water collected in your cistern might not be much better than the muck in the nearby stream. As for the peasants living outside the castles, their options were often even worse. Without any form of filtration, they relied on local streams and rivers, which had all the benefits of being free and convenient. Oh, and also highly contaminated. Still, they drank it, cooked with it, and washed with it. There was just no choice. People got used to the idea that illness was simply a part of life, which, let's be real, wasn't the best way to handle an invisible threat. And let's not forget that it wasn't just the drinking water that was a hazard. Every time you had to wash your hands or face, you were exposed to water that had been touched by countless others, from animals to other people. The idea of personal hygiene as we know it today, non-existent. A quick dip in a nearby stream might seem like a good way to freshen up, but all you were really doing was exchanging one set of germs for another. By now, you're probably thinking that staying hydrated in the 14th century wasn't as simple as just grabbing a glass of water. It was a game of survival, one sip at a time. And every time you reached for that bucket of water, you were gambling with your health. Your best bet, in a world that didn't yet understand germs, was to go with ale, wine, or even a boiled concoction. But the water? Don't even think about it. You might survive a sip, but chances are the water will win in the end. So, if you're thirsty, drink something fermented. You may not get the hydration you need, but at least you won't get cholera. So now you know. Don't drink the water. At this point, you've just been given your very own sleeping arrangement in the medieval castle. No, it's not a plush suite with satin sheets, nor is it a cozy little cot with fluffy pillows. In fact, it's a straw-filled mattress perched precariously on a wooden platform, barely elevated off the floor. The first thing you notice is the smell. A musty, mildew-laced scent that hits you the moment you step closer. The mattress is only slightly better than sleeping directly on the hard, cold stone. But don't get too excited. It's not the luxury you might think. You sink into the mattress, or more accurately, it sinks with you as it's full of holes and crawling with insects. You try to relax, but the uncomfortable pokes from dried straw make it hard to settle. But wait, did you just feel something scurrying across your arm? Yes, you did. That's because the mattress is shared by more than just you. Rats, lice, and mice have made themselves at home in the fabric. They're your roommates for the night. Uninvited, but undeniably present. You adjust and turn onto your side, but that's when the itching starts. The lice begin their march, creeping into your hair and under your clothes. They feast on your blood while you helplessly scratch at the incessant itching. Sure, you could brush them off, but good luck. Bathing is a luxury few can afford, and washing your hair or clothes isn't a practice that happens every week. And when was the last time you had fresh linen to sleep on? Certainly not anytime soon. You try to turn your attention to the pillow, if you can call it that. It's more of a cloth bundle filled with the same dirty straw. It smells like a mixture of sweat and animal musk. But don't get too upset. You're lucky to have any cushion at all. For most people, it's just the stone floor beneath them, or perhaps an old cloak to use as makeshift bedding. Now you may wonder, why are the rats and lice such a problem? The reality is that hygiene standards in the Middle Ages were practically non-existent. Many people lived in very close quarters, often in cramped spaces, where multiple families might share a single room. The lack of private bedrooms meant there was no escaping from the things that lived in your bedding. Rats were common visitors, attracted by the food scraps that never quite made it into the trash pile. With no proper sanitation, the population of rodents exploded, and they were known to scurry through rooms at night, often chewing on your clothes or bedding if left undisturbed. As for the lice, they were a constant menace. Combing them out was an impossible task, especially when the tools needed, like combs, were rare and expensive. Lice were so pervasive that they were considered a normal part of life. The itchy bites would follow you everywhere, during the day, and, of course, during your sleep. The real kicker here is that sleeping in the presence of these pests wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. Rats and other vermin were vectors for many diseases. The plague, for instance, was largely spread by fleas that lived on rats. And speaking of fleas, your skin is now the perfect new home for them as well. They're small, fast, and capable of surviving in the most hostile environments. You may try to swat at them, but they're relentless. And with each bite, you become more vulnerable to the diseases they carry. The rats weren't the only problem, though. The lack of privacy means that you're also sharing this space with your entire family, or possibly even a few cousins who've never left. Everyone is packed into a space the size of a small room, and everyone sleeps in close quarters. Some families even shared the same straw mattress. If you were lucky, maybe you got one for yourself. But no matter the size, comfort was not an option. Privacy was a luxury far beyond reach. When night falls, you can't even hide under the covers for a semblance of comfort. The fire in the hearth is smoldering down to embers, and the heat from it is a distant memory. The coldness of the stone walls creeps in, and the rats seem to become even bolder, scurrying around you as if they own the place. The smell of the unwashed masses around you fills your nose, making sleep feel even less achievable. The reality of communal living in a medieval castle or village was harsh. It wasn't just about sharing a bed with others. It was about sharing a space with animals, insects, and diseases. The walls around you, if they could talk, would surely tell stories of unspeakable hardships. And as much as you may wish for an escape, there's simply nowhere to go. The nights dragged on, and sleep never really came. You are a prisoner of your circumstances, confined not by stone walls, but by the lack of any real escape from this living nightmare. With morning comes a fleeting sense of relief, but only briefly, because as soon as you rise, you realize something worse. You now have to deal with the aftermath of sleeping in your own filth. The dirt from the floor, the rats, the lice. It's all part of the package deal, and when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Why else would you wake up in the morning covered in bites and itching from head to toe. The medieval way of life didn't offer much protection from the creatures that wanted to share your bed. At least the rats seemed to have more freedom than you did. Now, you took a few more steps in the castle, and by stepped, I mean that you may have slipped, because the stone floor you're standing on is slick with moisture, and the chill is cutting through you like a knife. Welcome to your first night, or what will feel like an eternity, in a place that doesn't care if you're freezing. The walls, they're stone, solid, ancient, and unforgiving. Castles were designed for defense, not warmth, so there's no insulation. None. Zero. That ancient stone just absorbs all the warmth it can, like a cold-hearted sponge, leaving you in a constant state of shivering. You wrap your arms around yourself in a futile attempt to hold on to any semblance of body heat. But it's not enough. The wind is relentless, slipping through every crack, every seam in the walls, the wooden beams, and the window openings. If you think you're safe from the cold, just because you're inside, you couldn't be more wrong. In fact, the inside might be worse, because there's nowhere for the cold to escape to. It's trapped, swirling around you like an invisible predator, gnawing at your bones. The windows? Not like the ones you're used to. No double glazing, no soft curtains to block out the wind. These medieval windows are little more than small openings in the stone, with maybe a rough wooden shutter to close them. And even then, that shutter doesn't do much more than rattle and creak in the wind, allowing the cold to seep in. Sure, you could try to block the drafts with a rug, but that won't do much for you when the air feels like it's been sharpened and is slicing through your clothes. And speaking of clothes, what you've got might have been made for the season, but it's not nearly enough to combat the temperature. A heavy wool tunic might be fine for the daytime if you're outside working, but here, inside a stone fortress, at night, you'll spend hours shaking, hoping your clothes will somehow provide enough warmth to stop your teeth from chattering. So, what do people in this situation do to survive the chill? The answer, unfortunately, isn't much better. People huddle together like livestock for warmth, not out of social preference, but because it's the only way to avoid freezing to death. The best you can do is gather around the hearth, which is little more than a fire pit in the center of the room. But there's a catch. Those fires? They're often poorly managed and poorly ventilated, which we'll dive into later, and there's no guarantee that the fire will actually provide any real warmth by the time you get close enough to feel it. You try to sleep, your body curled up in an attempt to conserve heat, but your back is stiff, your legs sore, and the dampness creeping through the walls ensures your skin feels clammy, no matter how much you try to pull your blanket over your body. As you lie there, you can hear the sound of the wind howling outside, and you start to wonder if this night will ever end. The cold, of course, is an issue of its own. It doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Without proper warmth, you're at risk for hypothermia, frostbite, and a whole range of illnesses that could leave you bedridden. In the medieval era, the line between life and death was a fragile thing, and hypothermia wasn't the worst thing that could happen to you in the cold. In fact, many people, especially peasants, didn't survive the winters because their homes were not built to keep them warm. Their clothing was inadequate, and firewood was often scarce. But if you think the inside of the castle is bad, wait until you venture into the towers or the lower rooms. The upper chambers, where the nobility sleep, might have thick tapestries hanging on the walls and better bedding, but it's still freezing. A little more insulation, a little more warmth, but not much. The lower rooms, though, the dungeons, or any space far removed from the hearth, these rooms are even worse, and they tend to stay cold throughout the year. No amount of wool blankets will save you down here. It's like the castle was designed to drain every ounce of heat from you, as if your discomfort was some sort of medieval punishment. There's another wrinkle to this miserable situation. Because, of course, it wouldn't be the medieval world if there weren't a few more ways to make your life worse. The idea of sleeping in shifts was not unusual, especially in castles with large halls. People would sleep huddled together in the same space, and it's not like a mattress and a bed with a soft pillow. No, it's a haystack at best, and a stone floor at worst. But when the draft comes, you might find yourself on the floor, while the few lucky souls near the fire get a bit more warmth. Your body, practically frozen, will ache even more than it did when you first laid down. But how do people deal with this? They don't. Not really. There's no modern solution, no electric heaters, no space blankets, no sleeping bags. There's nothing but layers upon layers of rough woolen clothing, fire pits that may or may not help, and a certain level of resilience born from years of living in conditions so miserable they become part of the norm. You can endure, you can survive, but you certainly won't enjoy it. So, as you try to fall asleep again, your body shivering under the weight of your damp woolen blanket, you can't help but think, how did anyone survive this for years? How did people live through winters so harsh, in buildings so poorly equipped, and in conditions so brutal? The answer, of course, is that they had to. It wasn't about comfort, warmth, or survival as we know it today. It was simply about getting through the night. So far, you didn't freeze solid, get crushed by a snoring uncle, or step barefoot on a slug the size of your thumb. But before you get any wild ideas about lounging by a fire or taking a second to mentally process the 14th century, think again. You're not a visitor here. You're not royalty. You are, in medieval terms, a warm body with working limbs. That makes you valuable, but not in a good way. You've been assigned chores. And here's the kicker. This isn't some cozy little list on a chalkboard like, take out the trash, or feed the cat. Number your to-do list includes fetching water from a well that's a 15-minute hike away, uphill both ways, in weather that can't decide if it's rain or fog soup. You're also responsible for sweeping floors that aren't floors, but rather compacted dirt, caked with so much mystery grime it crunches when you walk. Still think you're gonna check out the castle? Welcome to feudal labor, a system powered entirely by muscle, suffering, and inherited obligation. You're not relaxing, you're surviving, and barely. Your first task of the morning, water, not sipping it, carrying it, buckets of it. The castle doesn't have plumbing. Water doesn't come from a tap. It comes from your aching back. The well is down in the village, or worse, at the base of the hill the castle sits on like a smug stone toad. You're handed 2 wooden buckets with splinters and iron handles that freeze your fingers solid. Each one weighs as much as a toddler when full, and sloshes with every miserable step. Drop one, Try again. Spill some. Try again. Complain. Try again. But now with a slap from the steward, who hasn't smiled since the last harvest. By the time you get back, your shoulders are screaming and your feet feel like jelly in your boots, which, by the way, are just leather sacks pretending to be shoes. You think this earns you a break? Nope. Now it's time to muck the stables. Ever want to know what a horse eats? A lot. You'll become intimately familiar with this knowledge, because now it's exiting the horse in steaming piles of fury, and you're the proud recipient. With a crude wooden shovel, you scoop manure and straw into a wheelbarrow that barely turns and smells like fermented barn demon. The horses don't thank you. One tries to bite you. Another farts in your general direction. This is your reward for existing in the same time zone as nobility. The castle servants, if you can call them that, don't offer much sympathy. They've been doing this since they were 9. Some of them are 9. You're the newcomer, the outsider, which means you get the worst jobs. Sweeping the kitchen hearth? Sure, but don't breathe too deeply. The air is thick with ash, fish guts, and despair. Cleaning the chamber pot? That one's saved just for you. Spoiler alert, nobles eat better than peasants. A lot better. You'll see that again in chapter 17, when you're serving it to them and not eating it yourself. Maybe you think, well, at least there's a schedule, right? A set of rules or times? Wrong again. The only time that matters is sunlight. If it's light out, you work. If it's dark, you still might be working. Just more miserably. Breaks? Hilarious. You get a crust of bread sometime afternoon if the kitchen hasn't run out. Sit down too long and someone will ask if you've died. If not, get moving. Your supervisor is likely a reeve or steward, essentially the medieval assistant manager of misery. He keeps the servants in line, the jobs flowing, and the punishments prompt. Lazy? You get yelled at. Disobedient? A beating? Slacking off? You're assigned the worst job. Cleaning the latrine chute. Yes, that chute. The one nobles use when they sit on their stone toilet thrones and relieve themselves into the open air. That mess doesn't vanish on its own. And today, it's your problem. By mid-afternoon, your clothes are soaked in sweat, and something that isn't just sweat. Your hands are blistered, your muscles twitch from overuse, and you smell like you lost a fight with a pig pen. Because you did. You had to herd the pigs earlier, and pigs, it turns out, don't negotiate. One charged you, and now your shins are bruised and your pride is in the mud. Still, there's more. Laundry, but not the nice kind. No gentle lavender detergent. You're scrubbing linen shirts that haven't been cleaned since St. Swithin's Day, using lye soap so harsh it could burn a confession out of you. The water is freezing, the cloth is stiff, and someone is watching to make sure you don't waste time. As if you have any time that isn't owned by someone else. Maybe you ask, what happens if I do a good job? Great question. You get to do it again tomorrow. There's no moving up the ranks here. You're not getting promoted. At best, you might be known as reliable, which means more people will give you more work because they know you won't pass out immediately. Unless you do, in which case, they'll step over you and keep going. And don't expect any gratitude. This isn't the Disney version of castle life. There are no kindly head housekeepers or magical talking brooms. just exhaustion, hierarchy, and a faint chance you'll live to age 35. Eventually, the sun begins to set, and your last job is hauling firewood. Because, surprise, the castle's freezing, and someone important wants a fire. Not for you, of course. You sleep by the kitchen again, next to the dogs. If they're feeling generous, they'll let you keep a corner of the blanket they've been licking all day. But hey, congrats. You made it through a full medieval workday. Your reward? A few mouthfuls of cold pottage and a new understanding of why everyone back then looked so tired in the paintings. The good news at this point is that you're awake, still breathing, sort of, and slightly less groggy than you were an hour ago. The bad news? The air is thick enough to make you wish you'd taken that last breath in the fresh, bug-infested hayloft. You step out of your bed, which still smells like something that's been buried for too long, and stumble over to the window. There isn't one. Well, at least you didn't have to worry about opening it to let some fresh air in. In fact, there's no way for air to escape. It's a castle built of stone, with tiny, narrow windows that are more about defense than comfort. As you stretch your aching limbs, your lungs protest. You see, in medieval castles, smoke was not just an occasional nuisance. It was a constant companion, and not the kind that leaves you with a friendly hug and a cup of tea. No, this smoke was from the fire that never went out. The central hearth. This was the heart of your home, keeping you warm, providing light, and cooking your food. But it wasn't just your hearth. It was everyone's hearth. It was the one fire in the great hall that served everyone. And it blazed for hours, sometimes days, depending on how many rounds of feasting, jousting, and family drama had happened. The problem, of course, was that there were no chimneys. None. Zip. Zilch. The smoke from the ever-burning fire had nowhere to go except straight up, and even that wasn't effective. Instead, it got stuck, swirling in the low, crumbling ceilings of your castle's hall, and eventually settled over everything you touched. Imagine the air, thick, acrid, and heavy, with the remnants of roasted meats, boiling stews, and the constant need to keep everything from freezing during the colder months. In the colder months, it was a matter of life and death. No chimney meant that everyone in the castle had to deal with the effects of this smoke. And by deal with, I mean it was an inescapable fog of discomfort that clung to your skin, your hair, your lungs. If you're lucky, you might have a little ventilation. A hole, perhaps, in the roof, where the smoke would slither out as best as it could. But there's a catch. That hole was also the place where rain fell, and snow, and every other thing nature decided to throw your way. So while your lungs were likely being assaulted by the soot-filled air, your clothes were getting a healthy dose of dampness, and your body was slowly adjusting to the fact that this place was the world's greatest furnace, where the heat and smoke worked in tandem to cook you alive, just a little bit slower each day. You didn't just wake up with a headache. You woke up with the feeling that someone had set a campfire inside your sinuses, and then, just for fun, decided to smother you with a blanket made of wool and ash. Your eyes are watery, your throat is scratchy, and your breathing is ragged. It's as if you've been inhaling a blend of burnt wood and whatever is used to wipe off the accumulated grime of medieval life. Not exactly a soothing start to your day. Now let's talk about what all this smoke is doing to you. You've got soot lodged in your lungs, Your skin is a combination of ash and sweat, and if you were lucky enough to have any sort of personal hygiene, it's long gone. Your body feels heavy and sluggish, almost as if the air itself is draining the very life force out of you, bit by bit. Breathing becomes more of a task than a natural function. And the worst part? You're just getting started. The smoke, if not the worst of your day yet, is going to stick with you. It's a reminder of how precarious life was back in these times. It wasn't just that you were living in a castle. You were living in a place where the simple act of breathing might just have you wheezing by the afternoon. But it's not all bad, right? The hearth has some redeeming qualities. The warmth it provides on a cold winter's day is life-saving. Sure, it's roasting you alive in the summer heat and clouding your vision in the process, but at least you can feel your fingers after the sun sets. The castle was built for survival, and that hearth, despite the headaches it gives you, is the reason you're not freezing to death as night falls. Now, if you thought that all the smoke was a simple inconvenience, think again. The real trouble is the long-term effects. Chronic respiratory issues were a fact of life for castle dwellers. Soot-laden air meant that many were plagued by coughing fits, shortness of breath, and a general sense of physical decline over the years. Those lucky enough to escape lung disease were few and far between, especially since medical knowledge in the medieval era couldn't help you much. Oh, sure, you might get some herbs from a local healer or doctor who may or may not have known how to treat anything beyond a common cold, but no one had any real clue about what prolonged exposure to smoke could do to you. As the day progresses, you might find your vision becoming blurry from the constant exposure. Your skin will take on a yellowish hue, something that's less tan and more, you've been living in a haze for way too long. And for those around you, your breath will be an unpleasant reminder of how long you've been in this environment. You might not even realize it, but that smoke has become part of you. It clings to your clothing, your hair, and your very breath, marking you as a creature of the castle, slowly being cooked alive. If you thought you'd be lucky enough to escape the worst of this, think again. The air you're breathing is full of grime, pollutants, and so much ash you could probably scrape it off your lungs with a knife. And the best part? The day isn't even halfway through. Now, let's take a moment to consider the people around you. They've grown used to it. The constant smoke, the thick air, the low ceilings that trap all that ash and soot. But you've just arrived. This is your first day. You're not ready for it. You're not even sure how anyone can stand it. But as you cough, wipe your eyes, and try to find your bearings in this toxic fog, you realize there's no escaping it. Not unless you leave the castle. An option that is far worse than staying here and suffocating slowly. So you breathe it in, again and again and again. Your lungs get used to the burn, your skin, the itch, the air. Well, that's something you'll just have to accept. You've stumbled into the medieval kitchen, your stomach growling louder than a bell tolling for mass. The air is thick with smoke, and a clatter of pots and pans fills your ears as the cooks scramble to prepare the day's meal. You're immediately caught in a whirlwind of scalding steam, open flames, and the occasional flying utensil. If you're not careful, you'll lose more than your appetite. You'll lose your eyebrows, too. This, my friend, is not a kitchen you've ever seen before. There's no gleaming stainless steel or quiet hum of modern appliances. The hearth is the heart of this chaotic space, a roaring fire that sends sparks dancing into the air. Just one wrong move, and you'll be wearing a bit of that flame on your skin. There's no time for being careful when you're rushing to make enough food for the lord of the manor and all his guests. You quickly realize that these cooks have more in common with fire breathers than they do with modern chefs. The kitchen itself, it's a death trap. The floor is slick with grease and spilled water. The ceiling, low enough to give you a concussion if you're not paying attention. The walls are blackened with soot, leaving a permanent charred pattern, like some sort of medieval mural. Every inch of the space seems designed to burn, scald, or trip you up. And as you try to navigate this fiery maze, you'll notice the constant hustle of cooks darting around, dodging one another, as they try to prepare enough food for the Lord's banquet or the daily bread of the common folk. There's no room to move here, especially as every corner is crammed with food, equipment, and quite frankly, too many cooks. One careless nudge, and a pot of boiling water might come crashing down on you. Or worse, an iron skillet, fresh off the fire, might be swung too wide and knock you into the flame. You take a cautious step forward, only to find yourself ducking as a cook hurls a handful of salt into the pot. And did that hunk of meat just get tossed straight into the fire with no cooking utensils whatsoever? Apparently, the medieval chef's motto is, if it's not charred, it's not done. The smell is overwhelming. Smoky meat, bubbling stew, and bread that's just a little too burnt around the edges. It's a far cry from anything you'd call gourmet, but it's real, and it's the only food you've got. To add to the chaos, there's no such thing as health regulations in the medieval kitchen. There's no modern refrigeration to keep meat fresh, or sanitary practices to ensure food is free from disease. The medieval understanding of clean involves a lot of prayer and a lot of hope for the best. The same knives that were used to chop raw meat are then used to slice bread without a second thought. So, let's hope you've got a strong stomach, because what you're about to eat might be a little questionable. The fire spits and crackles as a cook tosses a haunch of meat into a bubbling pot of water. If you're lucky, it'll be pork. If not, tough luck. It might be some random animal that didn't survive last night's storm. Perhaps a rat or a pigeon. Does it really matter? You can't afford to be picky when food is scarce, and you've been warned. Waste not, want not. That means eating what's put in front of you, no matter how questionable it might seem. After all, if the lord of the manor can stomach it, surely you can, too. As the smoke thickens and the temperature rises, you start to sweat. The constant hissing of the fire, the scraping of the pots, and the voices of the cooks blend together into an almost hypnotic soundtrack. In a strange way, you begin to admire their resilience. They're used to this madness, the heat, the danger, the constant threat of burns, cuts, and smoke inhalation. It's just part of the job. They're the real masters of survival in this world of fire and iron. But your admiration is short-lived, as you realize that you, too, must navigate this chaos. Your stomach rumbles again, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air, though you're not sure whether it's the smell of food or just the smoke making you lightheaded. The kitchen, while essential to keeping the castle fed, is a constant reminder that in this world, comfort is a luxury and survival is the goal. With the heat and danger surrounding you, you're beginning to understand why many cooks in this era suffer more injuries than any night. The constant risk of burns, cuts, and poison from poorly prepared food was just another hazard of life in the kitchen. You wonder how long you'll last before you either faint from the heat or are consumed by the flames. Either way, it's not a comforting thought. As you stand there, dodging another flying spoon, you start to understand. The medieval kitchen isn't just a place to cook. It's a battleground. One misstep, and you're either burned, scalded, or worse. But you have no choice but to push through. The kitchen is where life happens, and if you want to survive here, you'll need to stay sharp, stay quick, and hope to avoid becoming part of the fire's cruel embrace. For now, though, you've got no choice but to keep moving forward. Hopefully, without setting yourself on fire in the process. Dinner is served: gray pottage, hard bread, and questionable meat. You've just been invited to dine in a medieval castle, but don't get your hopes up too high. Forget roast turkey legs, goblets of wine, or platters of roasted vegetables. This isn't a banquet fit for a modern-day king. In fact, if you're lucky, you might get something that barely qualifies as food. Welcome to the medieval dining experience, where taste was secondary to survival, and often, even the survival part was questionable. You sit down at the long, dark wood table where the flickering light of a torch barely illuminates the room. The atmosphere is thick with the smell of smoke and unwashed bodies. Your fellow diners, likely some servants, and a few local villagers, aren't looking at you with awe. Instead, they're eyeing the food, hopeful but wary. They know what's coming. The plates are filled with gray pottage, a bland, gooey concoction of whatever was left over from the day before. It's a mix of grains, vegetables, and whatever meat scraps the kitchen could find. Think of it as the medieval version of leftovers stew. Pottage wasn't made to delight the senses. It was designed to fill the stomach and stretch out the available ingredients. The vegetables? Mostly cabbage and leeks, cooked until they lost all resemblance to anything fresh. The meat? It's more of an afterthought. In some cases, it might even be spoiled. If you're a noble, spices like cloves, pepper, or cinnamon will be generously added to mask any unpleasant odor or taste. The problem? Even the spices could only do so much to mask the effects of old, improperly stored meat. Salted meat, left in the sun to dry, wasn't uncommon. Spoiled meat, when cooked with enough seasoning, could pass as just fine to a hungry, desperate stomach. As you chew through the bland mush, you notice the bread. It's not soft, pillowy white bread, but something much harder and more like a rock. This is medieval bread, stale, crusty, and almost too hard to chew. It's made from barley or rye, not wheat, because wheat was for the upper classes. The bread is dense, heavy, and more of a tool for soaking up the pottage than an edible side dish. In fact, if you're really lucky, the bread will have had a few days to dry out, allowing you to use it as a rudimentary utensil to scoop up the pottage. And you'll need it. There's no such thing as forks or knives for most peasants. At best, a spoon will be your only weapon in the battle against the soupy mass of boiled grains. For the servants and lower classes, It's even worse. They're not sitting at the grand table in the hall with their nobles. They're huddled in the corner, eating scraps off the floor, left behind from the noble's meal. And as for the meat, if it's not spoiled, it's the bits that the nobles didn't want. The organs, the bones, the fat. You'll notice your fellow servant pick up a small, greasy piece of meat, skin and bone, with more fat than anything else, and bite into it. For a moment, you wonder if they've lost their sense of taste. But no, they just know the harsh truth. In medieval Europe, food is a luxury, and you eat what you can find, no matter how questionable. And if that means gnawing on a hunk of tough meat or gnashing through a dry, stale crust of bread, so be it. If the meat gets a little too questionable, you can always wash it down with ale. That's right, ale. It's not just for special occasions. It's practically the only drink available. Water? Not unless you want a nasty case of dysentery. Ale is boiled, so it's a little safer than water from the well, though it's far from the refined beers we know today. The ale in the medieval castle is thick, strong, and sometimes so bitter you wonder if it's a drink or a punishment. But you're thirsty, and that's all that matters. Now, let's talk about that meat again. The chances of contracting foodborne illness are shockingly high in medieval times. Without refrigeration or the luxury of modern food safety practices, spoilage is a constant threat. You might not realize it, but the meat you're eating could be carrying all sorts of harmful bacteria. And if that meat has been improperly salted or stored, you're just as likely to get food poisoning as you are to enjoy your meal. If you're a noble, the kitchen staff may try their best to keep things fresh, but mistakes are still made. If you're a servant, it's much more likely that you're eating leftovers, or worse, something that didn't make it past the second round of dinner service. Spoiled meat might be hidden behind a wall of spices, but it's still going to wreak havoc on your stomach later. It's not just the food you have to worry about, though. In medieval times, there are no such things as leftovers containers or refrigerators. Once the food's been served, it sits in a pot or on the table, exposed to flies, rodents, and whatever else is wandering around the castle. Foodborne illness is practically a given. If you're unlucky, it's not just the meal that could kill you. It's the environment around it. Even in the most lavish of castles, kitchens were often filthy, with scraps of food lying around, cooking utensils that never got a good scrub, and floors that were home to rats and other vermin. Imagine eating in a place where the rats aren't just an inconvenience. They're the unofficial custodians of your food storage. By the time you finish your meal, such as it is, you're more than likely feeling a little ill. The chances of getting food poisoning, dysentery, or worse from improper storage are high, and you can almost hear your stomach groaning in protest. But you've survived it for now. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't pretty, but at least it filled you up. At least until the next meal comes along to remind you of just how much worse things could get. You've just been invited to dine in the great hall of a medieval castle. Sounds fancy, right? Before you get too excited, let's take a moment to prepare you. Medieval feasts, while grand in some ways, were a world away from the dinner parties of today. In fact, getting through a meal without embarrassing yourself, or worse, offending royalty, was a delicate art. Here's what you need to know. before you join the long tables lined with nobles and peasants alike. First, forget about your usual table manners. In the medieval period, dining was an entirely different social experience, a complex dance of etiquette that could mean life or death depending on how you behaved. You're about to step into a world where social status is written on every gesture, where missteps could result in public ridicule or even worse. And, speaking of status, let's talk about the people you'll be dining with. At the head of the table is likely a nobleman, or even a king. Think King Edward II of England, a man who ruled with some power, but whose reign was also fraught with political intrigue and scandal. If you're dining with the upper crust, you may also encounter royals like Queen Isabella, his wife, who was involved in one of the most notorious coups of the 14th century, or even a local lord like John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who wielded immense power over the English crown. As you settle in for the meal, take note of the tablecloth, or rather, the lack of one. In the medieval era, fine linen or cloths were rare commodities. Instead, you'll probably see a rough-hewn table covered in a haphazard cloth, which, let's be honest, probably wasn't washed between meals. It's not uncommon for food to be spilled and smeared. And for those at the lower end of the social ladder, this may be as close as they get to a proper tablecloth. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. In true medieval style, don't even think about using a fork. They hadn't yet been invented in England, so you're about to embark on the ancient art of eating with your hands. But wait. It's not as simple as grabbing whatever's on the table and chowing down. There are rules. For starters, use only 3 fingers, your thumb, index, and middle finger. This was the proper technique, and it would be considered rude and unrefined to use more than that. Imagine eating a roast chicken with just 3 fingers. Sounds like a challenge, doesn't it? But don't worry too much about etiquette, because you'll probably be distracted by the constant sounds of chewing, slurping, and burping echoing around the hall. It's a noisy affair, and there's little to no concern for table manners. After all, the very people who are judging you for your lack of refinement might just be wiping their noses on their sleeves between bites. Speaking of noses, don't even think about wiping it on the tablecloth. That's a major faux pas. Instead, you'll need to discreetly wipe your nose on your sleeve or shirt, as handkerchiefs as we know them don't exist. Hygiene standards were, to put it mildly, not great during this period. Germs, dust, and grime were just part of everyday life, and the air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, rotting food, and animal waste from the castle grounds. But back to the table rules. Another thing you should be prepared for. There's no polite conversation about the latest royal gossip or intellectual debate on politics. In fact, speaking out of turn is highly frowned upon, especially if you're a lower-ranking guest. The nobility set the tone for conversation, and it was best to wait until you were spoken to before offering your opinion. Disrespecting this rule could land you in trouble. And forget about chewing with your mouth closed. That's a modern courtesy that hasn't been invented yet. Chewing loudly was actually seen as a sign of vigor and enjoyment, so let those jaws go wild. However, there's a fine line between enthusiastic chewing and grotesque slurping. Know when to stop before you embarrass yourself. What's on the menu? Well, Don't expect a 7-course meal, but there will likely be plenty of meat, bread, and possibly some vegetables if you're lucky. A roasted boar might sit in front of the high table, with everyone picking at it using their hands. Be prepared for greasy fingers. Vegetables are often boiled in stews, though they're likely to be flavorless. And don't forget the bread. There's always bread. In fact, medieval bread was a huge part of the meal and used to sop up gravy, sauces, and whatever liquids made it to the table. If you're fortunate enough to be sitting with royalty, they will be served the best cuts of meat, and you might just be stuck with whatever's left over. The lower-ranking guests, often including you, will eat last, and the food that remains after the nobility has had their fill isn't particularly appetizing. However, no matter your social rank, you're expected to eat quickly. There's no leisurely sipping of wine here. You eat fast, or you go hungry. While you're gnawing on a chicken leg, take note of the royal food rituals around you. There's no dainty nibbling. Royalty, like King Richard II, might be tearing into a piece of lamb like it's a battle. It's a primal, messy affair. And the table rules only serve to underscore how different this is from modern, refined dining. As the meal progresses, you might notice that, while the nobles get the best of the food, they also get the best of the wine. Most castles serve wine, generally diluted with water, at every meal, but there's a strict hierarchy in who gets what. The higher your rank, the more alcohol you're given. The lower you are, the less you get, often limited to water or weak wine. By the time the meal finishes, you're likely to be stuffed and sticky, with grease smudged on your face, hands, and the surrounding area. Don't be surprised if the table is cleared away haphazardly, and the floor is soon littered with leftover scraps and crumbs. The medieval view of cleanliness is, it's fine if we can't see it, which makes the whole dining experience feel like an afterthought. No fine china, no elegant glasses, just hearty meals served in rough-hewn bowls and goblets. And if you're still hungry after the meal, well, the odds are low. At the medieval table, food was a luxury, not a guarantee. After all, you're just lucky enough to have been invited into this grand hall at all. Don't expect leftovers to be passed around, because they're likely going straight to the hounds or the castle staff. As you leave the Great Hall, don't expect an invitation back anytime soon. Medieval manners were strict, and if you failed to uphold them, well, let's just say it's not a good look. Enjoy your one and only royal meal, if you can survive it. While you're dusting off the straw and trying to gather your bearings, something catches your eye. No, it's not the noble lord or the tall knight you were hoping to impress. It's a pig. You're not imagining it. There's an actual pig roaming around the stone floors, snuffling its way through the great hall. The pig, it seems, is part of the castle's daily routine, both a companion and a nuisance. You take a step to avoid the snorting creature, but the floor is so slippery with mud and muck, you nearly lose your balance. Welcome to the medieval world, where the line between domestic animal and hazard is thinner than a thread of straw. In this time period, animals are a part of daily life, and not in the cute, Instagram-worthy way we see today. There are no boundaries between livestock and living spaces. Animals roam freely throughout the castle, in places that would make modern homeowners shudder. Cattle, goats, pigs, chickens, dogs, they all share the same space. Yes, the noble family might be dining at the grand table, but under the same roof, their pigs are rooting around beneath their feet. It's a far cry from the sanitized, pet-free homes we enjoy today. First, there's the obvious challenge: hygiene. Pigs, notoriously known for their love of mud and filth, are not the easiest of housemates. They make their home in the castle's inner courtyard, or, in some cases, within the castle's very halls. The smell? Well, imagine mixing damp hay, manure, and, to make things worse, rotting food scraps. That's your average castle air quality. But don't think you're safe just because you're in the Lord's chambers. The animals might not always roam freely through the high-born sections of the castle, but the stables and the inner yard, often connected to the main living spaces, might just be a few paces away. If you happen to venture out for some fresh air, which is questionable when you realize the nearby moat is also a toilet, you'll almost certainly encounter at least 1 or 2 chickens pecking at the ground. These chickens are not cute little cluckers. They're there to eat the scraps, poop on the cobblestones, and keep a close watch on the castle's inhabitants. As for the dogs, they're another animal altogether. Used for hunting, protection, and herding, medieval dogs aren't the lap dogs we know today. They're more likely to bite you than snuggle with you. The common breeds of the time were not small or docile. These were aggressive guard dogs, bred to protect both the livestock and the castle's inhabitants. If you're on the wrong end of one of their territorial snarls, it's not a good day. If you try to step too close to their food bowl or territory, you'll quickly find out why medieval dogs weren't the cuddly companions they are today. Let's talk about the pigs again. Yes, the pigs. You're trying to walk through the courtyard when you notice the pigs are giving you a sidelong glance. You might think they're cute, but remember, they're also massive and have no personal space awareness. They'll happily push you out of the way, and if you're not paying attention, you could easily end up with a shove into the muck. But it doesn't end there. The pigs and other livestock aren't just walking hazards. They're also the bearers of disease. In medieval times, the lack of modern hygiene and veterinary care meant that livestock were often carriers of parasites, fleas, and diseases that could easily jump from animal to human. The fleas you find gnawing at your skin could very well have come from one of these pigs, which were often used for meat and lived in unsanitary conditions. If you're lucky, you'll just get the fleas. If you're unlucky, you could be dealing with a much worse fate, like dysentery, or worse, the plague. And pigs, with their tendency to root through filth, are especially good at picking up and spreading parasites. Imagine you're trying to sit down to a modest meal, maybe a bowl of porridge, and suddenly a pig snuffles its way over, knocking your bowl aside as it sniffs at the floor for any leftover food. The pig is likely spreading fleas, and those fleas have no qualms about making you their next target. Just one more delightful aspect of life in the medieval castle. What's worse, animals didn't just stay outside. Inside the walls of the castle, in the rooms where the families lived, animals sometimes wandered freely. The Lord's castle may have been grand by medieval standards, but that didn't mean it was a sanctuary of cleanliness. In fact, many castles were overflowing with livestock, with pigs, chickens, and even the occasional cow wandering through common areas like the Great Hall. You can forget the "No Animals Allowed" sign. There are no such boundaries here. Animals were a necessary part of medieval life, especially on a castle estate that relied on them for sustenance, protection, and labor. In addition to their role in food production, livestock often helped with the physical labor around the castle. Don't be surprised if you see a pig wandering through the courtyard, not just foraging for scraps, but also hauling small burdens or serving as a makeshift cleaner for the space. Castles didn't have the luxury of cleanliness we take for granted today. The animals, pigs included, helped keep the area less filthy by eating scraps, but it didn't stop the filth from accumulating everywhere. And while you're navigating the slippery floors, dodging the occasional animal, you'll also need to watch your step for the surprises the animals leave behind. You won't just need to dodge a roaming pig, you'll need to avoid stepping in fresh droppings that litter the floor. It's not just a nuisance, it's a safety hazard. Animals are no more careful than humans, and in a crowded, dirty medieval space, stepping in animal waste is an all too frequent part of daily life. The truth is, the line between domestic and wild animals wasn't just blurred in the medieval period. It was non-existent. In a place where animals shared every space, whether it was the living room, the courtyard, or even the stairwell, your chances of going a day without encountering some form of animal chaos were slim to none. Pigs and chickens were no mere farmyard friends. They were a constant source of annoyance, danger, and hygiene problems. So next time you hear the pleasant clucking of a chicken or the soft grunt of a pig, just remember, in medieval Europe, you wouldn't have been able to escape them. Not in the castle, not in the streets, and certainly not in your bed. In fact, you might find yourself having to share your meals, your space, and maybe even your fleas with the animals that wander through. The medieval world was not one for the squeamish or the clean. It was a world where pigs were as much a part of the furniture as the stone walls surrounding you. So, you've made a mistake. Perhaps you didn't bow low enough before a lord, or maybe you said something that wasn't quite right. Maybe a joke that wasn't well received, or even a small transgression, like being caught in a whispering conversation with someone of a lower rank. In medieval times, your fate was not always in your hands, especially if you were caught breaking a rule. And there was one place you did not want to find yourself: the stocks. The stocks, or pillories, were the public's way of ensuring that everyone knew when someone had misstepped socially, and the punishment was as swift as it was humiliating. Public shaming was the most common form of punishment in medieval castles and towns, as it was seen as a way to deter others from similar misdeeds. If you were unlucky enough to be placed in the stocks, you could expect a whole lot of uninvited attention. The stocks themselves were simple, wooden devices designed to hold your feet in place, often in a public square or market, making you an unwilling spectacle for anyone passing by. It's likely that you would have to endure hours, or even days, of your punishment, your head and hands tightly secured in the pillory, while your feet were locked in place. It was not just the discomfort and indignity that made this so grueling. It was the mockery. You could expect insults, rotten fruit, and sometimes worse to be hurled in your direction as the crowds made their judgment. In a society that valued honor and reputation above all else, a public misstep could cost you your status or even your life. And the worst part? This wasn't the worst punishment you could face in a medieval castle. That would come if your mistake was more serious, such as theft, treason, or even simply being suspected of betrayal. For the more serious transgressions, you might find yourself facing flogging. Flogging, or whipping, was a common punishment for minor offenses, and its brutality was designed to make a lasting impression. You would be stripped of your clothes, your back bare to the world, and the lash would fall. Thick ropes or whips made from strips of leather or twine, often reinforced with metal, would tear into your skin. It was designed to leave scars, both physical and emotional, and the pain could last long after the blood had dried. The pain of flogging might not be the end of your punishment. Depending on the severity of your crime, you might also be branded. Branding was a method of permanently marking someone as a criminal, and it was considered an effective way to signal that a person had committed a grave wrongdoing. A hot iron would be pressed to your skin, burning your flesh and leaving an unmistakable scar for the rest of your life. If you were lucky, the brand would be on your arm or shoulder, easily concealed. But if you were unlucky, it could be on your face, forever visible, a permanent reminder of your failure. These public punishments were not just a consequence of crime, they were a social tool. The rulers of medieval castles or the lords of nearby towns needed to demonstrate their power. They needed to show everyone that justice would be served, no matter how small the infraction. And the spectacle of a public punishment was often as important as the punishment itself. People would gather around to watch these public shaming rituals, and in doing so, they were reminded of the rules they had to live by. It was an experience designed to breed fear, and to make sure that the consequences of breaking the rules were crystal clear. However, not all punishments were simply physical. The punishments for more serious crimes could be far more horrific. If you were unlucky enough to be accused of a severe crime such as treason or heresy, you might find yourself at the mercy of a far more severe justice system. In such cases, the lords or their judges might resort to more extreme measures, such as mutilation or even execution. Mutilation, as horrifying as it sounds, was another common form of medieval justice. If you were caught stealing from a noble, or if you had committed a grave betrayal, your punishment could include the removal of a hand, an ear, or even your nose. These acts of mutilation were performed in public to show that no crime, no matter how small, was without consequence. And the public nature of these punishments served as both a warning and a deterrent. What might surprise you, however, is that nobles were not immune to these harsh punishments either. Though they could avoid some of the public spectacles, they were not above losing their titles, lands, or privileges for serious crimes. Some noblemen who had fallen from grace found themselves exiled from their homes, while others saw their titles stripped away in favor of a more deserving family. In these cases, the loss of honor and status could be just as crippling as a physical punishment. In fact, one of the most famous cases of punishment within a medieval castle happened to a noble. In the early 14th century, a powerful English noble named Roger Mortimer was accused of treason after he was caught conspiring against the king. His punishment was swift, and although he didn't face flogging or branding, he was thrown into the Tower of London and was later executed by hanging. His fate serves as a stark reminder that no one, regardless of their social status, was truly safe from the reach of medieval justice. At the end of the day, the brutality of punishment was part of the larger medieval system. A world where fear kept order, and where people were forced to remember that their every action could lead to catastrophic consequences. Public punishments like the stocks, flogging, and branding were not just about physical pain. They were about power, control, and ensuring that the lower classes knew their place. The medieval justice system may have been harsh, but it was effective in maintaining order and in keeping everyone in line. You may have survived your misstep today, but beware, for even the smallest mistake could send you to the stocks, and you never quite know how far a punishment might go once you've been caught. The lesson was clear. In medieval times, no one was above the law, and a misstep could cost you more than you could ever imagine. The castle sleeps, but the walls do not. It's the dead of night, and you, an unfamiliar face, are alone in a fortress where suspicion is as thick as the stone walls. The air is damp, the corridors dimly lit by flickering torches, and every creak of the floorboards echoes like a shout. You've been wandering, trying to find your bearings, but now heavy footsteps approach. 2 guards, clad in chainmail and bearing the crest of their lord, block your path. Who goes there? One demands, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. You stammer, attempting to explain your presence, but your lack of identification only deepen their scowls. In a time rife with espionage and betrayal, a stranger is a threat until proven otherwise. The guards are part of the castle's garrison, a mix of seasoned soldiers and local recruits responsible for its defense. Their duties include patrolling the walls, manning the watchtowers, and challenging anyone who seems out of place. The castle's security is overseen by the castellan, who ensures that every entry point is guarded and every patrol is conducted with precision. In the 14th century, the fear of spies was not unfounded. During the 100 Years' War, espionage was a common tactic. Spies often posed as merchants, monks, or travelers to gather intelligence. The English fortress of Calais, for instance, was a hub for such activities, with reports of French spies infiltrating under various guises. In one notable case, Jean Bocquet, a French prior, was caught with incriminating correspondence and subsequently removed from his position. Back in the castle, the guards decide to detain you for questioning. You're led to a small chamber where the captain of the guard awaits. He scrutinizes you, asking about your origins, your purpose, and your affiliations. Without satisfactory answers, you're confined to a cell until the lord of the castle can decide your fate. As you sit in the cold, damp cell, you realize that in this era, being an outsider is perilous. Trust is earned slowly, and suspicion can lead to dire consequences. The castle's defenses are not just physical. They are built upon a foundation of vigilance, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to security. In the morning, if you're fortunate, you might be released. But tonight, you learn a hard truth. In a medieval castle, the night watch is not your friend. Your stomach is churning from the night's pottage, and nature is calling with increasing urgency. But in this era, Responding to that call is less about comfort and more about survival. You navigate the cold, damp corridors of the castle, the stone walls echoing with distant sounds of clanging armor and muffled conversations. The air is thick with the scent of smoke, mildew, and something less identifiable, but unmistakably foul. Your quest for relief leads you to a narrow wooden door, slightly ajar, revealing a small chamber protruding from the castle wall. Inside, there's a simple wooden bench with a hole cut into it. This is the garderobe. No flushing mechanism, no privacy, and certainly no sanitation. The hole opens directly to the outside, where waste plummets into the moat below. You hesitate, but the pressing need overrides your reservations. As you settle in, the reality of your situation becomes apparent. The cold stone chills you to the bone, and the lack of any barrier between you and the elements is both physically and psychologically unsettling. Suddenly, a voice from behind startles you. "Make it quick, will you?" Others are waiting. You turn to see a line of castle inhabitants, each displaying varying degrees of discomfort and impatience. Privacy is a luxury not afforded in this time. As you finish and step out, a gust of wind carries a particularly pungent odor from the moat. You glance down and see the murky waters swirling with refuse. The moat, once thought to be a defensive feature, doubles as the castle's sewage system. The implications are dire. During sieges, when waste accumulates and cannot be disposed of properly, the moat becomes a breeding ground for disease. Falling into it isn't just unpleasant, it's potentially fatal. Back inside, you attempt to wash your hands, only to find a basin of stagnant water and a communal rag. The concept of hygiene is rudimentary at best. You recall tales of gong farmers, individuals tasked with cleaning out cesspits under the cover of night, their work both essential and reviled. Reflecting on this experience, you gain a newfound appreciation for modern plumbing and sanitation. The medieval castle, while grand in appearance, harbors daily challenges that test the limits of human endurance. Congratulations, you've made it through another hour in the medieval castle. That's the good news. The bad news? You're itching. Everywhere. Your scalp feels like it's hosting a tiny jousting tournament. Your armpits are a battlefield. And your groin. Well, let's not even go there. You scratch, hoping for relief, but it only makes things worse. Welcome to the 14th century, where personal space is a myth, and parasites are your constant companions. Remember that straw mattress you collapsed onto earlier? The one that smelled like a barnyard and felt like a sack of rocks? It's not just uncomfortable, it's alive. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have made it their playground. These pests don't discriminate. Whether you're a peasant or a noble, if you have blood, you're a target. And in a castle where cleanliness is optional and bathing is rare, they thrive. Your clothes offer no refuge. In fact, they're part of the problem. Lice lay their eggs in the seams, and fleas hitch rides in the folds. Changing clothes is a luxury, and washing them? Even more so. Some believed that storing clothes in the garderobe, a medieval toilet, would protect them. The ammonia fumes from the waste were thought to repel pests. So your best outfit hangs above a cesspit, absorbing the scent of human excrement. Fashion meets function, medieval style. Bathing is infrequent, and when it happens, it's more about ritual than cleanliness. Soap is a beyond the discomfort. These parasites pose serious health risks. Body lice can transmit diseases like typhus and trench fever. In an era without antibiotics, such infections can be deadly. But knowledge is limited. Many believe that lice and fleas are born from filth itself, a punishment for sin or a test of faith. Some even see them as divine trials to be endured. In the face of relentless infestation, people resort to creative solutions. Some scatter alder leaves around their beds, hoping to deter pests. Others place slices of bread covered in glue with a candle in the middle, creating rudimentary traps. Mercury ointments are applied to the scalp, despite their toxicity. The cure is often as dangerous as the disease. Even the nobility isn't spared. Their luxurious tapestries and feather beds are breeding grounds for parasites. Servants are tasked with beating the fabrics to remove dust and bugs, but it's a Sisyphean task. In the castle, the line between comfort and infestation is thin. The higher your status, the more fabric you have, and the more places for pests to hide. As the darkness falls, the castle quiets, but your body doesn't. The itching becomes unbearable. You toss and turn, seeking relief, but find none. Sleep is elusive. You contemplate the remedies you've heard, burning herbs, wearing amulets, praying for deliverance. None offer immediate relief. In this world, parasites are a fact of life. They're not just pests. They're a constant reminder of your vulnerability. They test your patience, your resilience, and your sanity. You scratch, you suffer, and you endure. Because there's no alternative. You feel feverish. Bad idea. In the 14th century, a fever isn't a sign to rest and hydrate. It's a red flag that your humors are out of balance. The castle healer, a man whose qualifications include a collection of sharp instruments and a penchant for leeches, is summoned. He arrives with a smile that suggests he's more excited about the procedure than you are. He explains that your illness is due to an excess of blood, a common diagnosis in medieval medicine, which revolves around the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health is believed to be a balance of these humors, and any imbalance is thought to cause disease. So, naturally, the solution is to remove some blood. The physician produces a phlegm, a small, sharp instrument designed for bloodletting. He selects a vein in your arm, cleans the area with a cloth that may or may not have been used on the previous patient, and makes a swift incision. Blood flows into a bowl, and you start to feel lightheaded. This is considered a good sign. If you're lucky, the procedure stops there. But if the physician believes more blood needs to be removed, he might apply leeches. These aren't your average garden leeches. They're medicinal leeches, specifically Hirudo medicinalis, bred for their blood-sucking prowess. Each leech can consume up to 10 times its body weight in blood. They're placed on your skin, and you watch in horror as they swell with your blood. Once engorged, they fall off, leaving behind bleeding wounds. The physician assures you that this will restore your health. In reality, you've lost a significant amount of blood, and your body is weaker than before. But the physician is satisfied. He packs up his tools, gives you a pat on the back, and leaves you to recover. There's no follow-up, no antibiotics, and no understanding of infection. You're left in a drafty room, lying on a straw mattress, hoping that your body's natural defenses are enough to pull you through. This is medieval medicine, a blend of limited knowledge, questionable practices, and a whole lot of blood. And if you think this is the worst of it, just wait until you see what they do for a headache. Suddenly, the bell tolls. Once, twice, thrice, a slow, mournful chime that slices through the thick, damp air of the castle. It's not a call to prayer or a signal of celebration. It's a death knell, a grim announcement that someone has departed this world. In the medieval castle, death isn't a private affair. It's a communal event, a spectacle, and often a source of fear. The moment the bell rings, a hush falls over the inhabitants. Conversations cease. Laughter dies, and even the ever-present clatter of servants' footsteps seems to pause. Everyone knows what it means. Another soul has been claimed. You step into the corridor, the cold stone beneath your feet sending a shiver up your spine. The air is heavy with the scent of smoke, dampness, and something else, something metallic and sweet. Blood? Perhaps. Or maybe it's just the pervasive aroma of decay that seems to cling to every corner of the castle. As you make your way toward the source of the commotion, you pass by a group of servants whispering fervently. Their eyes dart around nervously, and one of them clutches a rosary so tightly that his knuckles turn white. Superstition runs rampant here. Death isn't just a natural end. It's often seen as a punishment, a curse, or a sign of divine displeasure. You finally arrive at the Great Hall, now transformed into a makeshift mortuary. The body lies on a wooden table, covered with a coarse linen shroud. Candles flicker around it, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. A priest stands nearby, murmuring prayers in Latin, his voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. The deceased is a young woman, her face pale and serene, but her hands are clenched and her body is rigid, a sign that death was neither peaceful nor expected. Whispers suggest she succumbed to a sudden illness, perhaps the plague. The mere mention of it sends a ripple of fear through the gathered crowd. In the Middle Ages, the line between life and death was razor thin. A simple fever could escalate into a death sentence. Medical knowledge was rudimentary at best, and treatments often did more harm than good. The priest continues his rites, sprinkling holy water and reciting passages meant to guide the soul to the afterlife. But there's an undercurrent of urgency in his actions. The longer the body remains unburied, the greater the risk of disease spreading. Time is of the essence. Outside, a grave is being hastily dug. The ground is hard, and the laborers work with a sense of dread. They know that the earth they're disturbing has already received countless others. Mass graves are common now, especially during times of plague. Individual burials are a luxury few can afford. As the body is carried out, wrapped tightly in the shroud, the bell tolls once more. It's a somber procession, devoid of the pomp and ceremony that might have accompanied such an event in earlier times. There's no music, no eulogies, just the sound of shuffling feet and the occasional sob. You follow at a distance, the cold night air biting at your skin. The grave awaits, a dark, gaping maw ready to consume yet another victim. The body is lowered in, and a handful of earth is tossed on top. The priest offers a final blessing, and then it's done. The crowd disperses quickly, eager to return to the relative safety of the castle walls. But the fear lingers. Who will be next? The question hangs heavy in the air, unspoken but ever present. Back inside, you find yourself unable to sleep. The events of the night replay in your mind, a grim reminder of the fragility of life in this era. Death is a constant companion here, lurking in every shadow, waiting for the slightest opportunity to strike. You wrap yourself tightly in your blanket, the coarse wool scratching against your skin. The fire has died down, and the room is cold. But it's not the chill that keeps you awake. It's the knowledge that, in this time and place, survival is never guaranteed. As dawn approaches, the first light of day filters through the narrow window. The bell remains silent, for now, but you know it won't be long before it tolls again. Because in this era, death is always just a heartbeat away. Now, you've been promoted, not to knight, not to squire, not even to a stable boy. No, you've been elevated to the prestigious position of feast servant. Your job? To stand silently, hands clasped, eyes lowered, and watch as the nobility gorge themselves on delicacies you've only dreamed of. Welcome to the grand hall, where the food is abundant, the hierarchy is rigid, and your stomach remains empty. The feast is a spectacle of opulence. Long tables groan under the weight of roasted meats, spiced pies, and exotic fruits. Peacocks are served with their feathers reattached for decoration, and swans arrive with their necks elegantly curved. The air is thick with the aroma of cinnamon, cloves, and roasting game, a stark contrast to the bland pottage that constitutes your daily fare. But don't let the abundance fool you. These feasts are not about sustenance, they're about status. Every dish, every utensil, every seating arrangement reinforces the social order. The lord and lady sit at the high table, elevated both literally and figuratively above everyone else. Their closest allies and highest-ranking guests flank them, while lesser nobles occupy the lower tables. As a servant, you're not even considered part of this hierarchy. You're a fixture, like the tapestries on the walls or the rushes on the floor. Your role is to anticipate needs before they're voiced. You refill goblets, replace trenchers, and ensure that no noble has to lift a finger more than necessary. You must be invisible, yet omnipresent, silent, yet attentive. A spilled drink or a dropped utensil could result in a beating or worse. Nobles are known for their tempers, especially when their comfort is disrupted. The utensils themselves are a lesson in hierarchy. Knives are common, but forks are a rarity, often viewed with suspicion. Most diners use their fingers, and it's your job to provide basins of scented water for them to wash between courses. The quality of the linen towels you offer can reflect on your competence. As the feast progresses, entertainment ensues. Minstrels play, jesters perform, and troubadours sing tales of chivalry and romance. Laughter echoes through the hall, but you must remain stoic. Any display of emotion could be interpreted as mockery or insolence. Occasionally, a noble might toss you a scrap of meat or a crust of bread. It's a gesture of generosity, but also a reminder of your place. You're expected to express gratitude, perhaps even kneel before consuming the offering. Refusing would be unthinkable. Accepting with anything less than effusive thanks could be seen as disrespect. The feast can last for hours, sometimes well into the night. As the guests retire, sated and perhaps a bit inebriated, your work continues. You clean the tables, collect the leftovers, which may be your only meal of the day, and prepare the hall for the next event. Sleep is a luxury you can't afford. In this world, food is more than sustenance. It's a symbol of power and privilege. As a commoner, you're reminded at every meal that you're at the bottom of the social ladder. Your labor fills the plates of the nobility, but your own plate remains empty. And so, as you scrape the remnants of the feast into a bucket, you can't help but wonder, will you ever get a seat at the table? Or are you destined to serve forever? You've just opened your mouth in medieval Europe. It could have been worse. At least you're not saying anything too embarrassing. Yet. But think for a moment. You're in a world where the wrong words aren't just awkward. They could be deadly. Language is a weapon, and the wrong choice could have you kneeling in front of the king, facing a punishment you didn't see coming. You could lose your head over a simple slip of the tongue. Welcome to a time when etiquette, class, and speech meant everything, and getting it wrong could ruin you. Let's start with the basics. In a medieval castle, or any medieval town for that matter, words were more than just tools for communication. They were markers of your place in society. That means, if you're not a noble, you'd better be careful what you say to one, because one false move, and you're a commoner in the eyes of the law. People knew their place, and so did their tongues. The lowborn knew to speak with deference, and any hint of arrogance or improper tone would be swiftly corrected, usually with a very public form of punishment. Even more dangerous was the church. If you spoke out against God or even the beliefs that defined the period, you'd find yourself staring down the wrong end of a burning torch. Heresy, blasphemy, these were words that could get you accused, tried, and executed. And let's be real, you didn't want to be the one who started speaking too freely at the dinner table when a priest was present. The wrong words, or even the wrong tone, could easily get you labeled as a heretic. And no, being a heretic didn't just mean a bad reputation. It meant being burned alive or worse, cast out from the community, your name disgraced for all eternity. So, you keep your opinions to yourself, or at least you learn how to disguise them. You're not supposed to speak out against your Lord. In fact, the very idea of questioning authority was alien to most people. The hierarchy was rigid, and words had a way of reinforcing that. You wouldn't dare call out the lord of the manor in the wrong way. And if you happened to have a noble guest, you'd likely choke back any snide remarks about their manners or taste in food. In fact, even a seemingly innocent comment could get you in trouble. For instance, if you commented that a meal was good when the Lord himself hadn't praised it first, you'd likely be considered rude. Oh, and forget about interrupting the Lord mid-sentence. That too could cost you. The rules of address were a serious business in the medieval world. Every noble, king, and queen had their specific titles that had to be used correctly, and woe to you if you didn't know the rules of formal speech. Imagine this. You've been invited to dinner at the castle. A noble family has graciously taken you in, and there's a feast in your honor. You might be a lowborn, but you've learned the basics. You know not to speak unless spoken to, and you're ready to nod along politely to everything that's said. But then, a servant, let's say one from the peasantry, addresses the lord of the manor without using the proper formality. Maybe they call him by his first name, mistake number 1. Or, worse, they forget to bow before speaking to him. Mistake number 2. The next thing you know, You're witnessing a brutal public punishment. All for a simple lack of respect, something that everyone in the room knew was unforgivable. The most terrifying thing, however, is that none of this would even need to be formally explained to you. No one would sit you down and say, "Here are the rules of speech, and if you fail to follow them, this is your fate." The system simply functioned on assumptions. You were expected to know where you stood, what words were permissible, and what ones could result in instant social ruin. There was no room for misunderstanding. You don't question. You don't speak out of turn. And you certainly don't offer your thoughts about the noble class. A bad word could be anything from questioning a lord's judgment to simply forgetting the proper title to address a knight. Even small phrases could have monumental consequences. Then, of course, there was the even more dangerous territory: politics. Whether you were a nobleman or a lowly peasant, politics were part of the atmosphere, and that meant speaking the wrong thing at the wrong moment could get you branded a traitor. Betraying your lord or monarch could lead to your family's downfall, or worse. And with the frequent rebellions and plots against kings, anyone who said the wrong thing, especially about the king's rule, was in serious trouble. This brings us to the language of love, or rather, the language of courtship. If you happened to be a lady, speaking the wrong words could be disastrous for your reputation and prospects. Compliments, flattery, and promises were all part of the game. But woe to you if you said the wrong things in public or failed to maintain the proper decorum. Too much openness or affection was seen as inappropriate. A woman could destroy her reputation with a single improper word or gesture. And heaven forbid you were involved in any romantic relationships that were outside the expected norms. Love in the medieval world was not about free choice or self-expression. It was political, it was transactional, and it was structured around power and wealth. You didn't speak of love unless it was tied to these things. A casual conversation about matters of the heart could easily turn into something dangerous if anyone got wind of it. A lady speaking too freely of her affections could be seen as morally loose, while a knight showing affection for a woman of lower rank could find himself socially ostracized. In the more religious circles, it wasn't just about what you said. It was also about how you said it. The church had a profound grip on speech, and it regulated even your private thoughts. Say the wrong thing in front of a priest or worse, admit to any blasphemous thoughts, and you could be subjected to penance, excommunication, or even death. No one ever really felt safe when it came to speech, because the wrong word, the wrong phrasing, could destroy your entire life. In this world, words were not just expressions of thought. They were mechanisms of power. You had to speak with precision. You had to act with restraint. You had to always keep your place in mind and watch your tongue. Your survival could depend on it. And if you spoke out of turn at the wrong moment, well, there's no polite way to say it. You wouldn't last long. So, as you go about your day in the castle, remember that every word you say is like walking a tightrope. One wrong move and you could plummet to the ground, your social standing shattered. Watch your words carefully, for in the medieval world, they hold more power than you could ever imagine. It's a dreary night inside the medieval stone castle. But wait, What's that, you ask? The faint glow of light? Well, good luck with that. You can't just light up your room on a whim. It's the middle of the night, and darkness is here to stay. So here's the thing. Candles were a luxury, not your typical flicking of a light switch at will. Here, in the year 1328, you're living in a world where darkness reigns supreme once the sun sets, and light is precious. You rub your eyes, blinking against the dim glow of a single flickering candle in the corner of your room. It's not enough to illuminate much. In fact, it might as well be a firefly in a hurricane. That's because candles, those little flickering miracles, were expensive. That candle, it cost a small fortune. You can't just light up a candle every time you want to find your way across the room. Trust me, you're not going to waste it on something like looking for your shoes. You're not getting to the fridge for a midnight snack either. What you see now is all there is. So what do you do when the dark of night wraps around you, thicker than the wool blankets on your bed? You've got two options, and neither of them are ideal. The first is the trusty rushlight used by the servants, if you were lucky enough to have any. The rushlight, made from the pithy inner core of the rush plant, was barely a step up from a spark in a storm. It burned fast, and it burned smoky, filling the air with a pungent odor that only faintly resembled something like candlelight. But hey, it was light, sort of. Most of the time, though, the real trick was simply embracing the night. Without a light, you couldn't do much, and so, just like everyone else, you'd eventually curl up in bed when the sun set, when your room turned into a pitch-black box, as though the universe was telling you it was time for rest. And honestly, when you live in these conditions, what's the point of staying up late? So, you drift into the same tired rhythm as everyone else, working, eating, and then finally laying down as soon as it gets dark. You'd do well to learn how to adjust to it, because candles? Yeah, they're a rare treat in the medieval world. As your eyes begin to adjust, you can't help but think about how this shortage of light shapes your world. No warm, soft glow to read by. No flickering firelight to guide your way to the pantry for a midnight snack. The darkness sets in early, and it stays late. Even if you wanted to read, study, or do anything else at night, your candle would likely be rationed for the really important things. Finding your way to the privy in the middle of the night, or lighting the hearth for a brief moment of warmth. And then, when the candle burned out, well, it's back to being lost in the dark again. The only option? Pray that your nose is good enough to guide you, or that your feet remember the path to the privy. At least in some castles, if you're high enough up the social ladder, you might have a chamberlain who's able to score a nice tallow candle for your chambers. But even then, don't expect it to last long. The wax used for these candles wasn't the purest of materials either. It was made from animal fat, which burned poorly and left a greasy, unpleasant residue. Even the richest noblemen couldn't get away from the smell that lingered in the air after the candle was snuffed out. But let's not forget that you're just one part of a much larger picture. Imagine all the people in the castle: guards, servants, cooks, knights, squires, each one vying for their share of the precious light. It wasn't uncommon for servants to end up with the leftover rushlights, those stubby little plants that offered more smoke than brightness. If you were a servant, you'd be living in the shadows, your movements dictated by the mercy of the feeble light of your rush. Imagine sneaking down the hall, trying to light your way without bumping into the walls or waking up the master of the house. A rushlight didn't do much for your confidence. Now, let's think about something even worse. Light wasn't just a luxury, it was a fire hazard. Those little flickering flames weren't kind to the stone walls or the thatched roofs of the houses. Oh no, the medieval world had no fire regulations, and certainly no fire extinguishers. If you were the unlucky one to knock over a candle or a rushlight, a fire could quickly grow out of control, consuming everything in its path. If your house or castle caught fire, there's a very real possibility it might be gone before you even had a chance to escape. The rushlight, that seemingly insignificant flicker of light, could very well be the spark that ruins you and all your possessions forever. Then, your medieval night is suddenly shattered by the deep, menacing sound of the castle gate bell. Bong, bong. The echo reverberates through the stone walls. Your heart skips a beat. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up. There's no mistaking that sound. It's the alarm. And when that bell tolls in the middle of the night, there's only one thing it means. Someone is at the gate. But who could it be? A traveler, seeking refuge? Maybe. But this is the year 1328, and in these treacherous times, you can never be too sure. It could just as easily be a raiding party, or worse, an enemy come to siege the castle. The thought alone is enough to send a shiver down your spine. The castle's thick walls have kept you safe so far, but now, all of that is in question. There's a moment of confusion. You're groggy, still shaken from the nightmare of your last few hours, but you don't have the luxury of wondering. People are already rushing to the battlements. You can hear the scramble, the clanging of boots on stone, the rustling of iron armor as knights quickly assemble. They're not wasting any time. This could be a real threat. The men-at-arms are always ready for something like this. But you? You've never faced an actual assault. Rushing to the windows of your chambers, you peer out over the courtyard. Your eyes squint as the darkness is broken by the glow of torchlight. Shapes move rapidly across the yard. It's a chaotic blur of frantic orders, raised voices, and nervous energy. Someone shouts in the distance, and you can hear the heavy sound of a drawbridge being lowered. The castle's gatehouse creaks as it opens, allowing a few armored men to rush out to confront whoever's on the other side. The guards have already positioned themselves, one by the large wooden portcullis, another at the arrow slits above, ready to rain arrows down if need be. You can't see who or what is outside, but the entire castle is vibrating with the tension of the unknown. You hear a deep voice from below, the voice of the castellan, the master of the castle's defenses. What is it? The response is short, but urgent. A traveler, my lord. A single man. He says he comes in peace. Peace? You think? The word almost seems absurd in this age of violence and uncertainty. No one arrives at a fortified castle in the dead of night unless they've got a very good reason, or are running from something. But the castellan is already moving. You can hear him barking orders, giving instructions. The man at the gate has to be carefully vetted. The last thing they need is some trickster using the guise of peace to slip past the walls and wreak havoc. The portcullis rises slowly with a rumble, grinding against the stone like a hungry beast waking from its slumber. Your mind races. If this is an attack, if this is just the first wave, there's no telling how much longer the gate will hold. But you're not a soldier, you remind yourself. You are a mere witness to the chaos, feeling the raw weight of fear that follows the uncertainty of every new arrival. You're in the heart of the castle, safe behind its towering walls. And yet, even this is no guarantee. It's easy to forget that, as strong as the castle may seem, it's still vulnerable. Vulnerable to a siege, to cunning tricks, and yes, to even a single well-placed traitor. Your gaze shifts from the gate to the high stone walls that surround the courtyard. There are arrow slits, yes, but they don't offer much cover for you. A mere onlooker. Your thoughts flicker briefly to the castle's defenses, those massive walls that were built with blood and sweat, designed to withstand the harshest of attacks. The towering, impassable keep in the center, the thick moat that encircles the entire compound, the guard towers that let archers pick off any potential enemies with deadly accuracy. But castles, as imposing as they are never invincible. A siege could take days, even weeks, and a clever enemy would know that a long-term battle can drain resources faster than it drains your patience. Food, water, arrows, and even the will to fight could all wear thin before the enemy ever sets foot inside. It's a game of endurance and patience, one that you could very well lose, no matter how strong your walls are. As you stand there, the drawbridge creaks back into position. The man, whoever he is, has been led inside. You can hear murmurs, voices raised in concern. The Castellan is questioning him, asking about his origins, his purpose. But the unknown weighs heavy in the air. Is this truly a traveler or a spy? Outside, the sounds of frantic whispers slowly fade. A second bell rings, louder this time, signaling the all clear. The visitor is being taken to the hall, you think, to face the lords and the captain of the guard. But the castle remains on edge. You can feel it in the way the men-at-arms stand a little straighter, ready for anything. You can hear the Castellan barking orders to reinforce the gates, to be prepared in case this peaceful visitor is something more insidious than he seems. The tension is still thick, like the air before a storm. You wonder, what would happen if the worst came to pass? If this visitor wasn't just a traveler, but a harbinger of something far more sinister. A raid could strike at any moment, from any direction. The men who guard the outer walls are trained for it, yes, but they're only human. The idea of a siege hangs in the air like a heavy fog, always present, but rarely addressed. No one wants to face the reality that sometimes, despite all the preparation, despite all the defense, a castle's walls can be breached. In the distance, the sound of a horn being blown. It's faint, but unmistakable. A signal. Could it be a warning from another castle nearby? Or just a signal of something more? Your pulse quickens, and you can almost taste the fear that has spread through the halls. For now, you are safe. But tomorrow? Tomorrow is a mystery. For now, the gates are closed, but the reminder hangs in the air. Castles can be defenses, fortresses of strength and survival, but they can also be prisons, keeping you safe until they no longer can, and you have no control over which one you'll face. The threat of battle is always lurking, just out of sight, like a shadow waiting to pounce. You're no soldier, not even close, but the lord of the castle, your lord, has raised his banner. And you're just a peasant, a commoner, with no training and no armor to speak of. Yet here you are, expected to fight as though you've been practicing swordplay since you could walk. And the worst part? You have no choice. In the medieval world, a noble's word is law. When they call for soldiers, everyone in their service, including peasants like you, is expected to answer. The banner is raised, the call is made, and your life, what little you thought you had control over, is now in the hands of fate. Or more accurately, the whims of a nobleman with far more wealth and power than you could ever dream of. You find yourself in the courtyard, watching other peasants scramble for their gear, which is laughably inadequate. Some are given helmets that barely fit their heads. Others are handed shields that look like they might splinter at the first impact. You, however, have been handed a rusted sword, an ancient relic that hasn't seen battle in decades, and a shield that's more splinter than wood. You swallow hard as you glance at your comrades, all of you in the same predicament. The idea of facing trained soldiers, men who have fought in wars before, men who know the art of war in ways that make your knees shake, seems impossible. You know nothing about the strategic placements of troops, the lines of defense, or how to form ranks. You have no idea how to wield a sword effectively, let alone block an attack. But it doesn't matter. The Lord has spoken, and your life, for now, is a tool to be used. The Lord's soldiers have been sharpening their weapons for days, preparing for the skirmish ahead. But you've been tending the fields, mucking out the stables, and scrubbing the floors of the castle. Your training comes in the form of some crude lessons handed down by veterans who are far too busy getting ready for battle to teach you anything of use. You look down at your hands, rough and calloused from years of hard labor, and clench your fists. These hands have never held a sword before. They are the hands of a farmer, a craftsman, a servant, not a warrior. But now, the battlefield calls. The horn sounds again, louder this time, a signal that the battle is near. You're herded toward the castle gates, where a long line of men and boys, some older than you, some younger, are preparing to march off to war. You glance around. Some have armor, piecemeal, mismatched, and often ill-fitting, but others are barely more than men in tunics with a bit of chainmail tossed over their shoulders for a semblance of protection. At this point, you're not even sure if the armor is to protect you from an enemy's blade or from your own incompetence. The weight of it presses down on you, and you feel every inch of it. The sword swings awkwardly at your side, its blade dull and unresponsive. The shield, though heavy, seems too small to protect you from anything substantial. You don't have time to think about it for long, though. The castle's drawbridge is lowered, and the sound of iron and wood grinding against stone fills the air. The Lord's banner flies high above you, its colors vivid even against the gray sky. The men around you murmur in low voices, and you hear the clinking of swords and shields as they adjust their gear. There is no fear in their eyes. They are warriors, after all. But you are not. You are merely a peasant being thrust into a world of violence you barely understand. You've survived the night, barely. But before you can catch your breath or enjoy the fleeting peace of dawn, the next shock to your system arrives like an iron fist. Religion. Specifically, the church. The one institution that looms larger than life itself, casting its shadow over every aspect of your existence. And it's not just a shadow. It's the sun around which the entire medieval world revolves. You didn't have a choice in being born into this era, but you did have a choice in how to live, right? Wrong. If you're in a medieval castle, the answer is clear. Your life is dictated by the church, whether you're a devout believer or not. And when I say dictated, I mean every single minute of your life. There's no escaping it. There's no personal faith journey. There's no gentle Sundays spent sipping herbal tea while contemplating existence. No, your soul and your behavior belong to the church. The castle may look grand with its towering stone walls and ornate furnishings, but even those grand walls echo the prayers and penance that define your every action. The church governs everything. Morning prayers? Yep. That's a must. Whether you've had a good night's sleep or spent the hours battling your itchy mattress and freezing feet, you better be up and kneeling by the first light of dawn for matins. And let's not forget the rest of the day. At regular intervals, you're called to pray, no matter what you're doing. You could be in the middle of a feast or sitting with the lord of the castle. Doesn't matter. Time to drop everything and pay homage. Daily life in the castle is framed by religious rituals. You and everyone else in that cold, drafty fortress are required to participate in prayers, fasting, and confessions, whether you believe in it or not. No one cares about your personal religious doubts. Every action, every word, is under the watchful eyes of the clergy. They are more than just religious figures. They are the gatekeepers of your soul and your behavior. Fail to follow the prescribed rituals, and you risk eternal damnation. At least, that's what the priest will tell you. The daily routine begins with prayer. Even before breakfast, you'll hear the bells tolling, calling everyone to the chapel for the morning mass. You shuffle over, cold and stiff, joining a throng of weary souls, all gathered in somber silence. The air smells like incense, damp stone, and something else. The vague scent of sanctity and suffering that permeates medieval churches. The priest chants in Latin, a language you barely understand. But that doesn't matter. Whether you grasp the meaning or not, you've got to say your prayers. There's fasting too. Food is scarce, but the church ensures that even what little you do eat is subject to rules. No meat on Fridays? Fine. You can live off dry bread, vegetable pottage, and the occasional fish from the moat. And don't even think about breaking these fasts, because there are consequences. The church frowns upon indulgence, whether you're indulging in food, drink, or something much worse. Self-reflection. Confession is another cornerstone of your existence. Every few days, you'll stand before the priest and confess your sins, no matter how mundane or intimate. Forget to help your neighbor haul his hay? Confess. Had impure thoughts? Confess. Stole a goose from the Lord's barn? Yeah, you better confess that too, or you could face far worse than just a penance. The priest has the power to absolve you or condemn you. Even though you're surrounded by the everyday chaos of the castle, even though your hands are caked in mud and your feet are sore, you are never truly free from the constant whisper of guilt. The church ensures that. If you're a woman in medieval times, You've just entered a world where the idea of freedom is something you've heard about in fairy tales, but never experienced. In the year 1328, your survival is measured by your submission. If you're lucky, you might live to see 30 years of age, but only if you can endure the brutal societal shackles placed upon you from the moment you're born. In a time when women were expected to stay silent, obedient, and dutiful, your worth was tied to your family and husband, if you had one, and your value was measured in dowries and children, not dreams or desires. As a woman, your life is defined by one word: limitation, and it's not just about the obvious ones, like your lack of education or your absence from political power. No, it goes deeper. From the moment you wake up, you're bound by a world where choices are luxuries you'll never know. You're defined by your role: wife, daughter, servant, or more tragically, property. Let's start with the most significant one: marriage. If you're from a noble family, it's not about love or choosing the man you want to spend your life with. It's about alliances, power, and family interests. If you're lucky, you might get a say in who you marry, but that's rare. Marriage for you is a transaction, not a celebration. If you're a peasant, it's even worse. Your marriage is probably arranged without your consent, and the man you marry might not even care for you beyond your ability to give him children. You'll marry young, usually in your teens, and you will be expected to bear children as quickly as possible. Your body is not yours. It belongs to the will of your husband, and sometimes to the needs of your in-laws. And let's not forget childbirth, the most dangerous act of your life. In an age where medicine is rudimentary at best, giving birth is a perilous journey. You might survive the first few children, but many women do not. With no access to pain relief, a midwife who may or may not know what she's doing, and a high risk of infection from the unsanitary conditions in which you give birth, your life is constantly at risk. Miscarriages are frequent, and many babies don't survive past their first few months. The emotional toll this takes on you is unimaginable, and yet you have no choice but to bear it in silence. Your body, too, is a source of shame and surveillance. Your every move is watched, your behavior monitored. You are expected to keep to a strict set of behaviors, particularly in public. The notion of decency keeps you confined. Your every action is scrutinized by the community. If you laugh too loud, speak too much, or wear the wrong dress, it's seen as a threat to the natural order. The heavy weight of societal expectations weighs you down. And it is this relentless surveillance that defines your existence. But you're not alone in this. Many women are bound together by their shared hardships. In the tight-knit villages or castles, you find solidarity with other women. You share stories, sorrows, and strategies for survival. But these bonds are fragile. One wrong move, one indiscretion, and the community can turn on you. You may be accused of witchcraft or an affair, or simply disobeying the rules. This leads us to the most unsettling part of medieval life for women: the punishment for defying social expectations. If you find yourself accused of something like adultery, witchcraft, or even having too much independent thought, you might find yourself in front of an all-male council, facing a punishment so brutal it'll make you wish you were never born. Women were often punished more severely than men for similar crimes, and often these punishments were public spectacles meant to remind all women of their place. Burning at the stake, drowning, whipping, and imprisonment were just a few of the fates awaiting those who dared to defy the norms. You're in a world rife with superstition, omens, and dark beliefs, some of which you might not be ready to face. If you've ever heard of witches, you've heard of the danger they posed in medieval times. But what you may not know is that everyone was seen as a potential threat. Even a small rash on your skin could be seen as a sign of something much darker. In medieval Europe, belief in the supernatural was not just common. It was practically mandatory. People believed in the power of the unseen world, be it the hand of God, the force of the devil, or the spirits of the dead. Every illness, every misfortune, every strange event had an explanation rooted in magic or divine punishment. The supernatural was real, and to ignore it was to risk your very soul. If you were a peasant, you might consult a local healer or wise woman. These women were the village's unofficial doctors, using herbs, potions, and charms to treat everything from headaches to broken bones. Some of these remedies worked, others didn't, but the fear of witchcraft lingered like a shadow over all these practices. A healer's simple charm for good health could be misinterpreted as witchcraft. A woman caught casting a spell might be accused of using the powers of the devil. Any unusual behavior was suspicious. Talking too loudly, staring into the fire, or even keeping to yourself could make others wonder if you were hiding dark powers. But the fear of witches was not confined to peasants. Nobles and royalty were just as likely to fear magic and omens. The courts were full of intrigue, and many believed that spells and curses could influence the outcomes of battles, love, and even royal succession. The superstitions surrounding the medieval period were so strong that kings and queens would often consult seers or astrologers, believing their guidance could determine the fate of nations. The witch hunts were especially brutal during the late medieval period. If someone was accused of witchcraft, it was a death sentence. The trials were based on flimsy evidence, often just rumors, the presence of witch marks, or simply a woman being too different. Some were tortured until they confessed, only to be burned at the stake. Entire communities would turn on one of their own, and no one was safe. A single accusation could ruin a life. So, if you woke up in a medieval castle, you'd be wise to avoid anything that might be construed as unnatural behavior. Whether you had an unexplained illness or even a bad mood, it could be your downfall. If you had a disagreement with a neighbor, or worse, if you were a woman who spoke too freely, you could be accused of being in league with the devil. And once you were accused, your chances of surviving were slim. If you're lucky enough, you'll make it through the night. But then, you'll wake up again before the rooster's crowing even reaches your ears. But the moment it does, you know it's time to move. The medieval world doesn't care about your sleep, but we do. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.